All right, and welcome back, dear listeners. This is Life After Life Beyond the Veil. My name is Morgan, and this is episode 3, part 3 of the series Father, I Think We Need to See Other Philosophies, the conclusion of a daughter's odyssey from conventional religion to enlightenment and the freedom found from becoming a believer of everything. So, we'd left off where a very poignant quote from Hermann Hesse had extricated me from my newly acquired OCD-driven belief spiral. I found that I now needed to start finding, as Mr. Hesse said, instead of searching. To me, it meant trying to live in the moment. Experience rather than fixate on the haves and have-nots of life. To stop looking for answers so heartily and allow the answers to come to me. But the hard part is I didn't want to stop learning entirely. Because of how I'm built, I knew it was going to be a precarious balancing act. I could always feel that edge of obsessiveness with every step that I took. It was at that time that my family and I also made the decision to move away from the chaos of the city to the slower tempo of the mountains. I had come to the realization that what had attracted me initially to the bustling life of the city in my youth was slowly strangling my spirit a decade later. The mountains felt like coming home. I don't know if you've ever felt that before, but it was the first time in my life that I felt that. There's a famous quote by John Moore that I find rings true, and it now hangs on a plaque above our front door. And it goes, "The mountains are calling, and I must go." I wasn't sure if it was the finding I needed or because suddenly I now wasn't being inundated with the overwhelming life I'd left behind, but things that I had struggled with started to seem clearer, and the life that I craved more attainable. I yearned to live more vividly. So I began forcing myself to live in the quiet. I knew that for too long, I had filled my ears and my mind with anything I could so as not to hear the silence, so as not to feel the silence and whatever came with it. I don't know if you've experienced that, but yeah. For some, hearing the silence is a thing, a very frightening thing. The unknown that comes with it, a frightening prospect. So I took up meditating, affirmations, and intentions. Instead of the works of fiction that I'd grown up with and depended on that provided an alternative reality and, of course, ended in happily ever afters, I picked up books offering alternative views on the afterlife and what happens to the soul after death. A reality that we are just barely starting to accept and understand even less. So the kaleidoscopes of religions that I'd studied, compounded with the dream that I had been granted, had started the foundation of my new belief system. A seedling just starting to breach the surface of the soil. It wouldn't fully flourish until I read Mansions of the Soul by Harvey Spencer Lewis. It was this book that brought it all to a head. It wasn't that I had never thought of the possibility of multiple lives or reincarnation. I mean, I'd read books on both Buddhism and Siddhartha, so I had been apprised of the concept. But I'd never allowed myself to sit in the notion of the soul accruing experiences over lifetimes, of the soul continuing to be refined until, I don't know what, nirvana? Just as the dream had portrayed. It was the thought of the souls coming and going, choosing of their own volition to return, choosing of their own volition to possibly stay. And I can tell you, while I still suffered from the crush of life, this new development felt more real and more right than anything had before. Like the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, I started seeing the connections. This body was the vessel given to us for our duration here on earth. But our soul was timeless. Our soul was the real deal, where it's at. It was our soul where we would find the core of who we are. The amalgamation of memories, traits, and, might I say, possibly lives? I felt an excitement brewing, a fire to keep going, to sit in the uncomfortable, to not default automatically by just shutting everything out as I always had. I wanted more. So it's here that we're brought full circle back to the story at the beginning of part 1. So if you haven't listened to part 1, episode 1, I do recommend that right now, so that you understand what story I'm referring to. So I put myself there. I allowed everything that I had been holding back and fighting to just come crashing in like a giant wave meeting the shore when there's no barricade to keep it at bay. And with that in mind, the level of destruction, unknown. But I presume to be catastrophic because I'd never done it before. It was in that barrage of negative thoughts and time that I'd tried to forget. My efforts paid off. After this encounter, and again I refer to the story at the beginning of part 1, episode 1, I was now a firm believer that there was something accessible. Something accessible to all of us. Something had seen my effort, had heard my need, and had responded, had found a way to answer, found a way for me to hear. What it was, I wasn't sure. Still not. Ghosts, spirits, loved ones from beyond, God, all of the above. Whatever it was, I can tell you that it was familiar, warm, and promising. I continued to find, but to be honest, it came in peaks and troughs. And what I mean is I would feel hopeful one minute, seeing life as if behind the veil, These beautiful moments, a river snake stalking a school of fish only to lash out and slowly devour his catch. A trio of horses on a neighboring farm bounding in a circle while throwing their heads back and kicking up their legs in joy under the bright sun after being cooped up way too long during a cold stretch. Or a hawk flying in perfect sync alongside the car on a backcountry road before swooping down to pluck roadkill from the asphalt and then disappearing into the trees. Then, almost as soon as I would crest these priceless heights, I'd plummet into a valley and despair over my life's circumstances, drowning myself in escapism once again. I abhorred this inability of mine to let go of my creature comforts. My inability to just submerge and submit myself entirely to this process. Everything depended on my next summit. All I could do was hold on and wait for the next rise. It was then that I came across a woman and her podcast that would banish all of the fear, all of the doubt, all of the shame. That dependency that had held me close all of my life. Her name is Sandra Champlain, and the podcast is Shades of the Afterlife on Coast to Coast. I don't know if you've ever listened to her, but I do give her podcast a recommend. Quite life-changing. I knew then, with all assuredness, that the dream that I had had was no dream at all. It was a gift. It was a look into the hereafter. Crazy as it sounds. Story after story, episode after episode, people that had near-death experiences describing the same scenario that I'd had as a mere daydream. They spoke of memories being washed clean before being born again. They spoke of life reviews viewed not by an omnipotent being that judged on sins, but you, yourself, being the viewer. You viewed your entire existence in the span of minutes. The thoughts and emotions of every single person you had ever interacted with, whose life you ever touched, just wash over you and fill you with either joy or remorse. The method not meant to shame, but to provide. The ability to learn and forgive yourself. They would come on panoramic slides or crystal pools beneath your feet, observed by you and your guides or you and the Almighty. The moment was personal and immense. It was then, as I'm listening to these people's experiences in these episodes, I come across one in particular. Something came to mind. I remembered something that I had written off many years before. It had been what I had thought at the time of just random fanciful dream. Just another one in a long life of dreams that could honestly provide plot points to novels or sci-fi movies. I was standing in a pitch black room that had no light. And because of the darkness, there seemed to be no walls and no ceiling. Just this black expanse, this thickness. I knew, though, that the surface that I stood on was water. I looked down, and a patchwork of white frames in varying sizes appeared, almost rising out of the black water. No glass, no plastic, just the interconnected frames floating on this dark pool beneath my feet. And it was then images started to appear in each of the frames, varying moments from throughout my life. Captured stills that began to move as I focused on each one, like personal movies that began to roll. And they went from private conversations with family to interactions with friends in high school. And the glimpses changed and rippled after they played out until I felt I had seen them all. And then that scene led to a natural close, and I woke up in the middle of the night. And based on the episode I'm referring to in the podcast of a woman that had experienced something so similar, I asked myself, had I witnessed my own life review without the prospect of death? A glimpse into what was to be? I now like to think so. So, here I am today to tell you that when you quiet your mind, you hear more. When you close your eyes, you see more. When you see that there is no death, you live more. There is so much that we don't know, so much that mystifies and fascinates. Works of others that seem innocuous and incredible can become inspirational and add to the tapestry of this earthbound experience and the afterlife, or as Sandra likes to call it, the hereafter, or as I would like to call it, life after life. My goal is to bring to you various works and thoughts on a hopeful bi-weekly basis, if life allows, that will, what I wish, inspire you to stop searching and start finding for yourself. So I ask you now, join me on this journey to self-enlightenment, soul awakening, and the discovery of a world so much richer than we had dared to hope or dream of. Again, my name is Morgan. This is Life After Life Beyond the Veil podcast. Happy years and happy tears. Cheers, y'all. I'll talk to you next time.